I'm David, a 61-year-old retired engineer from Toronto, and I'm about to share a story that's deeply intertwined with my granddaughter's life. It was a cool autumn morning when my life took a startling turn. I discovered Sophie, my 7-year-old granddaughter, left abandoned at my doorstep. Her parents, my own son James and his wife Sarah, had made a baffling choice to prioritize their life in Paris over their daughter's well-being. Guys, brace yourselves. This tale is like diving into a wild jungle of family drama, crazy favoritism, and an epic battle for what's right. What I didn't see coming was how this adventure would blow the lid off some mind-blowing secrets and decisions that would flip our lives upside down forever. Get ready for a story that's not just sad, but packed with shocking twists and a mission to fix what's broken. It all kicked off one wild morning in late October, the day everything in my world went topsy-turvy. Having been a widower for a decade, my days usually revolve around cherished memories and hobbies to fill the time. But that particular morning, as I went out to grab the newspaper, I was met with a scene that tore at my heartstrings. There was Sophie, my 7-year-old granddaughter, curled up and shivering on my doorstep. When she saw me, she looked up and whispered, "Grandpa," in a voice so faint it was almost lost in the morning air. Sophie's eyes were a poignant mix of relief and fear. I hurriedly ushered her inside, enveloping her in a warm blanket, my mind a whirlwind of questions. Where could James and Sarah be? Why was Sophie here all by herself, appearing so desolate and forsaken? While I made her some hot cocoa to warm her up, Sophie began to unravel her story. James and Sarah, it turned out, had departed for Paris. But shockingly, they had taken only my grandson, Oliver, with them, leaving Sophie behind. The revelation that James and Sarah considered Sophie a burden for their trip was staggering. A burden? That word reverberated through my mind, fueling a fierce blend of anger and disbelief. For years, I had observed the stark contrast in how James and Sarah treated their children. Oliver, an intellectually curious boy with a deep interest in technology, always seemed to be the apple of their eye. In stark contrast, Sophie, with her gentle love for nature and passion for painting, appeared to be merely an afterthought in their lives. I tried to discuss this with James, but my concerns were brushed off, lost in the hustle of his busy life. That morning, seeing Sophie so discarded, something in me snapped. It wasn't just about a trip to Paris. It was about a child, my grandchild, feeling unwanted and unloved. I decided to take action. I reached out to Richard, an old friend and a seasoned attorney. Over coffee, I explained the situation, my voice shaky with a mix of rage and concern. "David, this is serious," Richard said, his expression grave. "We need to ensure Sophie's safety and well-being. Let's start by getting temporary custody." The following weeks were a blur of legal documents, meetings, and tense phone calls. Sophie stayed with me. Her presence turned my silent home into a space filled with laughter, chatter, and the occasional sound of her paintbrushes swishing against the canvas. Her artwork was a window into her soul, vibrant, filled with life, yet tinged with a sadness that no child should bear. Meanwhile, James and Sarah were in Paris, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing back home. When they returned, I was ready. The confrontation was inevitable. I stood at their doorstep, Sophie clinging to my hand, Richard by my side. James walked in, his expression a complex blend of surprise and annoyance. "Dad, what's this about?" he inquired, his gaze flickering towards Richard. With a firm resolve, I said, "James, we need to talk. It's about Sophie." My voice was steady, belying the inner tumult I felt. Sarah emerged behind James, her face shifting from curiosity to outright disdain at the sight of Sophie. What followed was a conversation that was both heated and excruciatingly painful. Accusations flew, harsh words were spoken, and the veil of pretense that had long shrouded our family dynamics was finally lifted. "You never cared about her," I accused, my voice rising. "You left her like she was nothing." James' defense was weak, his arguments crumbling under the weight of his own guilt. Sarah, on the other hand, was unapologetic. "She's just not as gifted as Oliver." We have to invest where it matters, she retorted, her words cutting through the air like a knife. The meeting ended with a bitter resolve. Richard and I would file for temporary custody of Sophie, citing neglect and emotional abandonment. James and Sarah's reluctance to fight back was their silent admission of guilt. The court proceedings were a mere formality. The judge, after reviewing the case and hearing Sophie's timid testimony, granted me temporary custody. Sophie's relief was palpable, her small hand gripping mine tightly as we left the courtroom. In the following months, Sophie blossomed. Her paintings, once somber, now burst with color and hope. Her school teachers noticed a remarkable improvement in her demeanor and grades. Life, it seemed, was finally looking up for her. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. As the custody battle for Sophie unfolded, it unearthed a slew of long-hidden family secrets and deep-seated resentments. I found myself sitting on the porch one evening, watching Sophie play in the yard, lost in thought. Just then, a call from Richard jolted me back to reality. His voice, grave and laced with urgency, conveyed the weight of his words. "David, there's more to this situation than we initially thought," he said. "I've been investigating further, and what I've uncovered is alarming. It goes beyond mere neglect." The implication of his words hung heavily in the air, hinting at deeper, more troubling aspects of the situation. "There's something else, something that could change everything." His words sent a chill down my spine. What had Richard uncovered? What were James and Sarah hiding? As the autumn leaves fell around me, I realized that this journey was far from over. There were truths yet to be revealed, and I braced myself for what was to come. I sat across from Richard in my living room, the autumn sun casting long shadows on the floor. Sophie was at school, her laughter and chatter replaced by a heavy silence as Richard unfolded the documents he had brought. "David, there's something about James and Sarah's finances that doesn't add up," Richard began, his eyes scanning the papers. "It's not just a misuse of the $15,000 education fund. There are large, unexplained transactions in offshore accounts." My heart sank. James, my only son, entangled in something dubious. It seemed far-fetched, yet the evidence was hard to ignore. Could this be related to their treatment of Sophie? I asked, trying to piece together the puzzle. "Possibly, there's more," Richard continued. "I've spoken to a few people. There's talk about James being involved in some shady business deals. This might be why they favored Oliver, grooming him for something bigger." The impact of Richard's revelation was staggering, almost like a physical blow. For all these years, I had been completely oblivious to the dual existence my son had been living. My focus had been so intently on Sophie's well-being that I had missed the bigger picture. It became clear that I had to confront James, but not before I fully grasped the scope of what he was involved in. With Richard's assistance, we embarked on a thorough investigation into James' financial dealings and his network of connections. It was imperative to unravel the truth behind his actions and understand the real reasons behind their decision to leave Sophie behind. Over the next few weeks, I found myself diving into a world I never knew existed. Each discovery was more disturbing than the last. James was indeed involved in questionable business practices, with Sarah playing a significant role in their execution. The turning point came one evening when I received an anonymous email. Attached were documents and photographs that left no room for doubt. James was not just involved in shady deals. He was at the heart of a significant financial scandal, one that had far-reaching implications. With Richard's guidance, I decided to use this information as leverage. It was a risky move, but I was determined to protect Sophie and bring the truth to light. The day of reckoning came swiftly. I invited James and Sarah into my house under the pretense of discussing Sophie's future. James and Sarah entered, completely oblivious to the brewing storm. I initiated the conversation with a calm yet assertive tone. "James, we need to talk about your activities." His response was instantaneous and telling. His complexion turned ghostly pale, and he shared a look of sheer panic with Sarah. It was evident that their carefully constructed facade was beginning to crumble under the weight of impending revelations. "Look, whatever you think you know, it's not what it seems, James attempted to deflect, his voice quivering, betraying a lack of conviction. The air was thick with tension, signaling the unraveling of secrets long hidden. I laid out the evidence before them, bank statements, emails, photographs. With each piece, their defense weakened. The truth was undeniable. James, how could you? I asked, a mix of anger and heartbreak in my voice. And Sophie, how could you neglect your own daughter for this? It was Sarah who broke the silence. It was all for the family, for a better future, she said, her voice laced with desperation. But their excuses fell on deaf ears. The damage was done. The trust one had in my son, the pride I once felt, was shattered. I gave them an ultimatum. Either they come clean and face the consequences, or I would take the evidence to the authorities. The choice was theirs. The meeting ended with James and Sarah leaving in a haze of fear and disbelief. I sat there alone, feeling a weight I had never felt before. This was not just about Sophie anymore. It was about righting a wrong that had spiraled out of control. In the days that followed, James and Sarah's world unraveled. The scandal broke out, splashed across the news and social media. Their reputation, their social standing, everything they had built crumbled. In the midst of all the tumult, there was Sophie, a beacon of innocence. Her eyes, filled with childlike wonder, looked up at me, blissfully unaware of the tempest engulfing her parents. In that moment, I made a silent promise to myself to protect her from the chaos, to be her steadfast guardian during these uncertain times. One evening, as I tucked her into bed, the quiet was pierced by her small, vulnerable voice. "Grandpa, will everything be okay?" she asked. Her eyes, wide and trusting, searched mine for a sign of comfort and security. This simple question from such an innocent soul only reinforced my resolve to ensure her world remained as undisturbed and safe as possible. "Yes, my dear, everything will be okay," I replied, holding her close. But deep down, I knew the hardest part of our journey was yet to come. The shadows of the past had been revealed, but the future was still uncertain. As I watched him asleep, I knew I had to prepare for what lay ahead. The battle was far from over. In the aftermath of the scandal, the world around James and Sarah crumbled. But another challenge loomed ahead of me. Protecting Sophie from the fallout became my sole focus. I watched her play in the garden, her laughter a stark contrast to the turmoil that surrounded our family. It was during these quiet moments that I found the strength to face what was coming. The legal ramifications of James and Sarah's actions began to unfold rapidly. Richard kept me updated, his visits becoming more frequent as the case progressed. "David, this is going to be a long battle," he warned me one evening. James and Sarah were facing serious charges: fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, the list goes on. I nodded, my heart heavy. This was not just a case of financial misconduct. The situation was a stark and painful example of betrayal and a violation of moral integrity, with my own son at its core. As the court dates drew nearer, a deep sense of apprehension enveloped me. Meanwhile, Sophie, blissfully shielded from the grim reality of her parents' looming legal battle, found her peace in the world of her paintings. Her art had evolved into more than a mere pastime. It was her sanctuary, a place where she could channel and freely express her feelings. It became a crucial outlet for her, allowing a glimpse into her unspoken thoughts and emotions amidst the turmoil surrounding her family. Meanwhile, the public's interest in the scandal grew. Reporters and journalists hounded us, eager for a statement or a sensational story. I shielded Sophie from their prying eyes, determined to keep her life as normal as possible. The day of the first hearing arrived. I sat in the courtroom, a mix of anxiety and resolve coursing through me. James and Sarah, once so confident and poised, now looked deflated, their faces etched with worry. The evidence against them was overwhelming, their defense was weak and unconvincing. As the trial progressed, the depth of their deception became painfully clear. They had not only embezzled funds, but had also been involved in illegal activities that went beyond financial misconduct. The prosecution was relentless, painting a picture of greed and dishonesty. One particular moment in the trial struck me deeply. A former associate of James testified, revealing the extent of James' involvement in the criminal activities. He was the mastermind, the associate said, his voice steady. Sarah was complicit, but James was the one pulling the strings. Hearing those words, I felt a profound sense of loss. The son I had raised, whom I thought I knew, was a stranger to me. As the trial neared its conclusion, I found myself reflecting introspectively. Where had I erred? What warning signs had I overlooked in James' upbringing? These questions haunted me. When the verdict came, it was unyielding and harsh. James and Sarah were found guilty on multiple counts, leading to a stringent sentence of years in prison and substantial fines. While justice had been served, it brought me no sense of triumph or relief. Instead, there was a profound sense of grief and emptiness. The realization that my own son had strayed so far from the values I thought I had instilled in him was a source of deep sorrow. It was a bittersweet resolution, with the justice system prevailing, but at the cost of my family's integrity and unity. The outcome was necessary, yet it left an indelible mark of sadness. In the quiet aftermath of the trial, I focused on rebuilding our lives. Sophie, now more attached to me than ever, became my priority. I enrolled her in a new school, one that nurtured her artistic talents and provided a stable environment. She thrived there. Her teachers praised her creativity and resilience. But the ordeal had left its mark on us. Sophie, though young since the absence of her parents, asked about them occasionally. Her questions were simple, yet laden with unspoken emotions. I answered as best I could, trying to balance the truth with a sensitivity to her feelings. During this time, I found an unexpected source of support in Richard. He visited often, not just as my attorney, but as a friend. We spent evenings discussing the case, the future, and life in general. His presence was a comforting constant in a world that had turned upside down. One evening, as we sat on my porch, Richard broached a subject that had been on my mind for a while. "David, have you thought about what will happen when James and Sarah are released?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. The weight of Richard's question lingered, laden with implications that were difficult to grapple with. Up until that moment, I had not permitted myself to contemplate that far into the future. The prospect of confronting James and Sarah again, especially after the tumultuous events that had unfolded, seemed like an overwhelming task. With a heavy heart, I confessed to Richard, my voice barely above a whisper, "I don't know, Richard." At that moment, my primary concern, my singular focus, was on Sophie. I just want to protect Sophie to ensure she has the life she rightfully deserves. My words were a reflection of my resolve to be the guardian she needed, to provide her with stability and love in a world that had shown her so much uncertainty and neglect. Richard nodded, understanding my dilemma. "Whatever happens, David, I know that you're not alone in this. We'll face it together." His words were a balm to my weary soul. In the midst of the chaos, I had found an ally, a friend who stood by me through the darkest of times. As the night drew in, I looked at the stars, wondering about the future. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. I would do whatever it took to ensure Sophie's happiness and safety. The battle might have been won, but the war was far from over. The years following the trial were a time of healing and growth for Sophie and me. We had become inseparable. Our bond was forged in the fires of adversity. She grew into a bright and compassionate young girl, her talent for art blossoming under the nurturing environment I strove to provide as Sophie entered her teenage years. The question of James and Sarah's return loomed over us. I knew the day would come when we would have to face the past and confront the future. It was a reality I approached with a mixture of apprehension and resolve. On a crisp autumn morning, eerily reminiscent of the day Sophie first appeared on my doorstep, I received an unexpected letter. It was from James, penned from within the confines of his prison cell. The contents were a blend of remorse and a heartfelt plea for forgiveness. In his letter, James described his time behind bars as a profound journey of self-reflection and change. He conveyed that Sarah, too, had experienced a similar shift in perspective. They both, according to his words, had come to a deep understanding of the severity of their actions and the immense pain they had inflicted. The letter seemed to be an attempt to bridge the vast chasm their actions had created, a tentative step towards mending broken bonds and healing old wounds. It was a complex mix of emotions for me, facing the contrition of a son who had once strayed so far. I read the letter to Sophie, watching her face for any signs of distress. To my surprise, she was calm, her eyes reflecting a maturity beyond her years. "Grandpa, I want to see them," she said quietly. Her decision was not born out of naivety, but a desire to see closure, and perhaps in her own way, understand why her parents did what they did. The day of the reunion was laden with a quiet tension. We met at a local park, a neutral ground amidst the autumn hues. James and Sarah, now free, looked older, the lines of time etched into their faces. The moment they saw Sophie, a wave of emotion washed over them, a mix of joy and sorrow. The conversation was tentative at first, a dance around the past shadows. But as the hours passed, walls began to crumble. James and Sarah expressed their remorse, their voices laden with genuine regret. They spoke of their efforts to make amends, to rebuild their lives on foundations of integrity and humility. Sophie listened, her heart open but guarded. She asked questions, her voice steady, seeking answers to the voids of her childhood. James and Sarah's replies to my cautious overtures were as earnest as they could be under the circumstances. Their words and actions reflected a genuine journey of self-reflection and transformation they had embarked on. As the day drew to a close, with the setting sun casting a golden hue over the park, a tentative understanding, if not a full reconciliation, began to take root among us. The journey towards forgiveness was lengthy and fraught with uncertainty, but crucial first steps had been taken in that direction. In the ensuing months, there was a gradual shift. James and Sarah, through consistent efforts and a newfound sense of responsibility, slowly started to reintegrate themselves into Sophie's life. This process was delicate, balancing the need for healing with the complexities of mending a fractured family dynamic. It was a path marked with tentative hope and cautious optimism. It was a cautious integration, guided by Sophie's comfort and willingness. I watched their interactions, a silent guardian of Sophie's well-being, ready to step in if the shadows of the past threatened her peace. During this time, I found a sense of closure for myself. The bitterness and anger that had once consumed me gave way to a cautious acceptance. I realized that holding on to the pain would only cloud the joy of the present. Sophie's art, which had been a refuge in her tumultuous childhood, now became a bridge between her and her parents. Her paintings, vibrant and emotive, became a medium for dialogue and understanding. James and Sarah, in turn, showed a genuine interest in her work, their pride in her achievements, a bond to the wounds of the past. The story of our family, marked by betrayal and redemption, became a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Sophie, who had once been a symbol of neglect and abandonment, had blossomed into a young woman embodying resilience, strength, and a remarkable capacity for empathy. Her journey, marked by adversity yet filled with growth, had become a source of inspiration to everyone around her. As I sit here, reflecting on the twists and turns of our story, I am profoundly reminded of the transformative power of forgiveness and the human potential for change. Our family, which was once fractured and disjointed, has gradually learned to coexist and forge a path forward. We are building our future, drawing from the profound lessons of our past. This journey has taught us the value of understanding, the strength found in compassion, and the healing that comes with time. It's a testament to the enduring nature of familial bonds and the ever-present possibility of reconciliation and renewal. The road ahead is still long, and the scars of the past will never fully fade. But in Sophie's laughter, in her art, and the tentative bonds that now connect us, there is hope. A hope for a future where the mistakes of yesterday are not the chains of tomorrow, but the lessons that guide us towards a better, kinder world.